The wind knife through the broken stained glass as Maya Johnson wedged a crowbar beneath the sacristy floor. Her last $600 sat folded in her pocket like a dare. Outside, Mateo and Luz waited in the car, fogging the windows with nervous drawings. The deed, bought for $100, crinkled in her jacket. She tapped the stone. Hollow. Again. Hollow. Her fingers found a brass ring flush with mortar where no ring should be. The floor thudded like a buried heartbeat. Neighbors had said cursed. A pastor had said debts. She had 5 days before eviction. Pull the ring and risk collapse, or walk away. 3 hours earlier, she killed the engine and stared at the church. The bell lay cracked in the weeds like a busted tooth. The nave's windows were boarded except for the rose, a bruised wheel of glass that still caught the gray light. Peeling icons watched from warped panels. A cross hung askew, nailed into plaster that had forgotten its purpose. Maya breathed once, counted to 5, and told her reflection, "We just need shelter." Mateo unbuckled before she could stop him. "It's huge," he said, voice half awe, half warning. Luz pressed a mitten to the fogged glass and traced a sun. "It looks sad." "It's not sad," Maya said, opening her door. "It's tired." The city's foreclosure sign flapped on the chain-link fence. Public liability, immediate action required. At the auction that morning, no one bid. Not the developer with the polished shoes, not the scrapper who kept coughing into his sleeve. The clerk had shrugged. $1 clears the ledger, 100 clears my Friday. Mara signed and felt something in her chest unclench and unknot at the same time. Now, standing on the cracked steps, she slid the new key into a rusted lock. The door stuck, then yielded with a sound like a sigh. Cold air rolled out. The nave was cavernous, a ribcage of beams and dust motes. Pews sat at angles like driftwood after a flood. In the corner, a fallen hymn board still held numbers, a frozen service for nobody. They stepped inside together. Their footsteps sounded too loud. A smear of color glinted from under a pew. Luz darted and pulled out a folded paper, a child's drawing in waxy crayon. A lantern hovering above wavy lines. In a shaky hand, 2 dates repeated. Luz held it carefully, like it might flake into air. "What's the lantern?" Mateo asked. Mara studied it. Lantern over water. A logo? A camp? Maybe a church group. A throat cleared behind them. A thin pastor in a threadbare coat stood near the doors, hat in his hands. His eyes were the kind that had buried people and remembered. "Miss Alvarez, I'm Father Calhoun. I used to serve here before the diocese deconsecrated. Congratulations, I suppose." "Suppose," Mara said. He looked around, the wistful way of a man counting ghosts. This place carried more than sermons. There were debts. Someone finished. "I bought them," she said, then softened, or at least the roof. He nodded at the drawing. "You find pieces. Folks called this place stubborn. It held on when the mills didn't. You got kids in the car?" "2," Mara said. 5 days before we don't have a car either." He shifted, as if weighing how much to say. "If walls could testify." Then he tipped his hat, sudden. "Careful with the sacristy. The floor remembers the river." He left before she could ask. Outside, a pair of neighbors watched through a chain-link cut. One shook his head. "Cursed," he said softly. "Not cruel, just tired." Another muttered, "Should have torn it down in '09. Maya crouched by the front pew and ran her fingers along a groove carved into the wood, a small lantern scratched by someone's pocket knife. It wasn't art. It was a mark. The air carried the mineral tang of wet stone, and somewhere below a distant hum threaded through the quiet, too steady to be wind. She pictured the eviction notice folded on the glove box, the 5 nights she needed to convert a corner into beds and warmth. She pictured Mateo's shoulders lifting around his ears when people stared, Luz's habit of hiding under tables when voices sharpened. "We can make it work," she said, not for persuasion, but to set the floor of her own resolve. They moved methodically, because method calms panic. She checked the bell tower stairs, safe enough, 1 step at a time. The choir loft, soft spots flagged with orange ribbon from some previous inspection. The side chapel, plaster flakes like snowfall but dry. The sacristy, stone flags cool beneath her palm, a faint echo with each press. When the door closed behind her, the sound rippled through the nave and came back altered, as if the building answered with its own memory. She exhaled. The church felt like it was listening. In the vestry drawers, she found a cracked chalice, a spool of thread, and a tarnished iron key tucked beneath a carved dove. The key was heavier than it looked. She rolled it in her hand. Maybe the attic held something she could sell. Candlesticks, organ pipes, stained glass scrap. Not saints, but groceries. On her way back to the nave, she paused at the fallen bell. Its mouth faced the ceiling, and inside, a faint line of chalk curved like a crescent. She touched it and came away with dust that smelled like matches. Next to it, 3 letters faintly visible on stone. LFR. Lantern Fund Run? She didn't know why those words linked, but her mind reached anyway. Time was running. She had 5 sunsets to turn a ruin into shelter. She had a $100 deed and $600 of last chances. And under the sacristy, the floor was hollow. She found the attic door behind a warped panel at the back of the choir loft. The iron hasp was cinched by a chain, links fat with rust. The heavy key from the vestry fit nothing she'd tried so far. She tested the latch, felt the stubborn give of wood that had swollen through too many winters. Safe rooms by week's end, that was the goal. The attic might hold something saleable, a way to stretch groceries and gas. What blocked her was a chain, a missing key, and the slow creep of doubt tapping at her ribs. She had no choice but to improvise. Mateo and Luz were downstairs stacking hymnals into neat towers like tiny fortresses. "Stay where I can hear you," she called, using the steady tone that kept fear from multiplying. The bell tower stairs curled up into a throat of dust and pigeon feathers. Halfway, she paused to test each riser with her heel. Through slats in the louvers, the mill stacks stood like dead trees. A rope hung where the bell rope used to be. The cracked bell below moaned once as wind threaded the nave. It sounded like a warning and a memory at once. At the top, light slanted through narrow openings, painting the stone in blades. In a niche no wider than her palm, a carved dove stared out, a relief softened by years of damp. She thought of the iron key's weight, of Father Calhoun's hat twist, of the chalk crescent in the bell. She pressed the dove and felt a click. A sliver of mortar shifted. Behind it, cold iron kissed her fingertips. She eased the secret backer free. Wrapped in oily cloth lay a second key, longer, teeth old as the tower. "Okay," she whispered, breath fogging. "Okay." Back at the chain, the new key slid home with a reluctant bite. She turned. The chain spilled like a shed skin. She lowered it quietly and put her shoulder to the door. It opened on dry air and the smell of mouse nests. Dust lifted in a slow, lazy cloud. The attic stretched under the pitched roof, ribs of truss and a runway of boards. Crates were stacked in 2 careful rows, labels browned and curling. Hymnals, altar cloths, winter coats. The careful handwriting looked like a teacher's. Near the eaves, a sealed chest sat apart, iron banded, lid strapped by leather gone brittle with age. She set her palm to the chest and felt the faintest hum. Not mechanical, more like the way your own blood sings in your wrist when you've been running. She eased her crowbar under the clasp. The leather cracked. The hinges complained. The lid lifted, exhaling a bite of air that smelled of paper, machine oil, and old rain. Inside lay bundles, wrapped in linen. She pulled one, then another, laying them on the boards. Ledgers bound in thick covers, letters tied with twine, a rolled map that crackled when she untied it. She knelt, legs prickling with pins, and opened the top ledger. Names marched in careful lines, dates in the margins, tiny annotations like footprints. The ink was iron gall, brown, seeping. Along the edges, someone had written in a different hand, smaller, quicker. Lantern Fund, Night School, milk vouchers, strike kitchens. Some names were neat, some erased so hard the paper thinned to lace. She traced an erasure and felt anger bloom like heat. Erased didn't mean gone. It meant someone tried to make them so. She flipped to a letter. "Sister," it began, "if they shut us down, The lantern goes underground. We are not finished. We are never finished. Signed with a single initial that looked like an L and maybe an I. Lose, she thought, then shook it off. Coincidence. Through the floorboards, a sound threaded up, faint, steady, almost pitched. Mateo's voice rose, then fell. The hum didn't follow his cadence. It was lower, rounder, like a note sung into a bottle. She put her ear to the boards. A breath of cooler air kissed her cheek. The church was breathing beneath her. The floor was not just hollow, it was alive with movement she couldn't see. She unrolled the map carefully. The church rendered in crisp lines, nave, transepts, sacristy, tunnel sketched in dotted strokes. A star marked beneath the sacristy. Next to it, in that small, quick hand, only at low tide. She frowned. Inland. No tide. But the mill town had culverts, old canals rerouted and buried. The bell hum answered like a low choir, and she felt the tick of a puzzle piece turning. She photographed pages on her phone, the battery already cheating red. Then she froze on a margin note beside a list of children's names and dates. Lantern Fund receipts. See Ledger C. She dug deeper. Ledger C's cover was scored with a lantern scratched by a blade. Inside, an entry boxed in pencil. Emergency fund relocated. 2 nights' notice. Password on file. Her stomach tightened. The box was empty except for the line. Password on file. Whose file? Where? She flipped through pages until a loose scrap slipped free, a fragment torn from a letter. If they shut us down, the lantern goes underground. The rest ripped away. Her fingers shook, not with fear, but with the weight of a hand reaching across time. The truth was worse than rumor. They'd run a city under the city. Children's names, milk, doctors who signed in initials only, and someone had tried to wipe them out with a bottle of ink. She closed the chest and sat back, dust haloing in the light. The attic didn't just hold junk. It held testimony. She looked at her watch. 5 days was now 4, and a morning. Food wouldn't buy itself. But shelter wasn't just walls. It was proof that you belonged. She slid the key into her pocket and gathered the ledgers and the map. As she stood, the floor hummed again, soft as a carried song. I hear you, she said, not sure if she meant the church, the names, or the version of herself that refused to be small. Then she headed for the stairs, the weight in her arms both burden and anchor, and the word, low tide, beating like a clock. By afternoon, the rain returned, drumming a dull rhythm on the nave's boards. Only at low tide, she murmured, staring at the map. Inland, no tide. But the town had bones older than pavement. She spread the map, laid her phone's dying glow beside it, and traced the dashed lines that veered from the sacristy toward the street, like veins. Storm drains. Culverts. Before the mills, there'd been a feeder canal that carried logs and grain. She remembered a newspaper clipping she'd read in a laundromat once, a flood that swallowed basements when the culvert backed up. Lantern Run, they'd called it then, after a volunteer brigade who waded through knee-high water with lamps to warn families at night. She pulled open a warped cabinet, found a tube of brittle blueprints and eased them flat. Plumbing schematic, hand-marked. A faint note in pencil. Tie into culvert, verify flap valve. The culvert line ran like a ghost under the sacristy, down to a junction marked LR. She exhaled, a laugh, more breath than sound. Low tide wasn't ocean, it was pressure. When Lantern Run drained, the air below would ease. Kids, she called, flashlights. Mateo brought a camping torch with duct tape on its handle. Luce clutched a cat-shaped nightlight, solemn as an offering. In the sacristy, the stone-flagged floor smelled metallic, a cold coin pressed to the tongue. The hum rose and fell with the rain, a living metronome. She knelt and pressed each flagstone's edge with the crowbar tip, listening for the hollow answer. On the third row, left of the vesting table, the sound deepened. She brushed away grit, revealing a round set of brass large as her palm, flush with mortar, its surface dulled by time. The ring was not decorative. It was decision. Stay on the step, she told them, gentle but absolute. They nodded, beam steady. She wedged the bar beneath the ring and leaned. Nothing. She reset, tightened her grip, and pulled until her shoulders burned. Metal complained. Mortar cracked with a soft pop like a jar opening. The ring lifted a fraction. Cold air rose in a thin ribbon across her knuckles. She smelled wet brick, rust, an echo of river. Before she could pry again, boot soles squelched in the nave. A flashlight burned a slice across pews. "City Inspector," a voice called, clipped, official. A man in a hard hat stepped into the sacristy doorway, rain glittering on his jacket. He took in the kids, the crowbar, the lifted ring, the map splayed like a confession. "You can't occupy. Floor's compromised. I could cite you on a dozen violations I can see from here." "We're not occupying," she said evenly. "We're assessing." He frowned. "Assess from outside. These old foundations hide surprises. One rung pull and the whole corner could settle." Mateo tensed behind her. Luz's nightlight flickered. "You'll post a notice?" she asked. He glanced at the cracked plaster. "I'll have to. Owner of record?" She tapped her jacket. "Me." His gaze softened a hair when he noticed the eviction fear hiding under her steadiness. He sighed. "I know the speech won't land, but don't open anything you can't close." He scribbled on a pad, tore off a yellow sheet, and stuck it to the door frame. "That stays until an engineer signs off." The moment he turned, she slid the crowbar back beneath the ring. "If not us, who?" she whispered. She pulled. The ring rose, and with it a square of stone no thicker than 3 fingers. A draft climbed the back of her neck, colder than the room, older than the rain. The hum sharpened, gained a companion, faint, layered voices like singing heard from a block away. Luz's whisper barely reached. "Do you hear it?" Mateo nodded, eyes wide. "It's like in the car when the radio catches another station." Mara lifted the slab and angled it aside. Beneath, a stairwell fell into brick dark, each step slick with centuries. The lantern symbol was painted on the wall at eye level. Simple, sure. Its flame a triangle, its base a square. Chalk marks crowded the bricks, numbers, initials, tiny sketches of letters to copy, dates bracketed with dashes. She sat on the top step, felt for the next with her heel, then the next. The air cooled the deeper she went. The singing, if that's what it was, resolved into memory. A dozen voices murmuring vowels, a teacher counting beats. Her flashlight slid over the curvature of a tunnel throat. The brick was hand-laid, honey-colored where dry, black where seepage had kissed it over time. She reached the bottom and drew her light along the wall. Lessons etched in chalk still ghosted through damp, a row of capitals, A, B, C, beneath them shaky names. A date, 1934, then 1941, then 1968. A chalk star pointed left. She followed it. The passage narrowed, then opened into a space no bigger than a bedroom. Benches made of planks and crates lined the walls. On a bucket sat a chipped enamel mug, fossilized in a ring of dust. The lantern symbol repeated, above a door of riveted steel set into brick. No handle, only 3 iron studs and a carved verse above the lintel. "Let the little ones find light." Her breath caught. The studs were slots, not decoration. The verse wasn't pious flourish, it was instruction. She pressed her palm to the door. It was cold, thrumming faintly with the culvert's hidden river. On the jamb, a shallow recess, shaped like a coin, waited, empty as a held breath. Footsteps scuffed behind her on the stairs. "Mom?" Mateo's voice wavered between bravery and the edge of being small. "I'm here," she said, voice low to keep the room intact. "We found a school. We found a promise." "And a door," Luz added, awe flattening her words into whisper. Mara angled the light at the slot. "And the lock," she said. "If they shut us down, the lantern goes underground." She touched the verse and felt the stone's cool certainty. "Let's go back up," she said finally. "We'll need more than nerve to open this." As they climbed, the air behind them carried the thin, phantom echo of a children's choir holding a note that refused to fade. By morning, rust had crept back over her certainty. The vault door's studs stared like shut eyes. On the steel, someone had taped an old scrap, brittle, curling, its pencil message barely legible. "Leave what fed us in the dark." She rubbed her thumb across the words until graphite smudged her skin. Whoever wrote it wasn't warning treasure hunters. They were protecting a lifeline. She spread the ledgers across a pew and started cross-referencing. Names repeated across columns like a chorus. Doctors' initials matched shipments of gauze and penicillin during winter strikes. Milk vouchers correlated with hospital births in the same weeks. The Lantern Fund wasn't myth. It was an underground school, clinic, food bank, everything the town needed when mill owners locked gates and shaved wages. The truth was worse for those who tried to bury it. They'd fought literacy and hunger with erasure. The map star needled her. She needed someone who remembered the star as a room, not a rumor. She found Rosa Iannucci through a name tucked into a margin, R.I., beside a list of night classes. A neighbor gave her a number. The voice on the phone was smoke and gravel. "Lantern Run, you're late by a lifetime," Rosa said. "But I'll come." Rosa arrived with a cane and a scarf knotted like a flag. Her eyes were sharp as fishhooks. She stepped into the nave and inhaled, as if bracing for a punch. "I learned my verbs down there," she said, tapping the floor with her cane. "We read by candles and coal lamps. We hid our books when men in suits knocked. We took turns with shoes." Mara guided her to the stairs. Rosa descended them slower than memory, one hand against the wall, touching chalk ghosts with fingers that had peeled potatoes in the dark. In the vault room, she rested her palm on the door and closed her eyes. "After the raid," she murmured, "we bricked the path the children could still use. Never thought I'd feel the breath of it again." "What raid?" Mateo asked, voice small, respectful. "They called it an inspection," Rosa said, thin smile cutting. "Took the ledger, thought they'd taken the light. We moved at night for months, then someone disappeared, Loredana. She taught numbers and never lost her temper, gone after following a man with a badge." The air cooled around them. The note on the door seemed to darken. Upstairs, the front door studded open. A man's voice rolled through the nave like a polished shoe on marble. "Ms. Alvarez?" He appeared in the aisle as if he owned the horizon. Vincent Hale. His name lived on development signs like signatures. Crisp coat, careful smile, eyes that measured costs. "I'm your neighbor, in a manner of speaking. I own adjacent parcels. I heard about your investment. Thought I'd help you out of a bind." "I'm not in a bind," she said. "Everyone in a condemned building is in a bind." He glanced at the yellow notice. "Let me make a clean offer. Cash. Today. Enough to move your children somewhere safe." His gaze flicked toward the sacristy. "These old places don't forgive mistakes." Luz's hand slid into hers. "We're not selling," Maya said. Hale's smile thinned. "There are liabilities you don't understand. Hidden tunnels? That's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Think about the kids." He left a card on a pew as if setting a trap in plain sight. 2 days, he said. Then I petitioned for emergency demo. That night, the church answered his promise with a break-in. She woke to a wrong silence, the kind that has teeth. Pews had been dragged into crooked barricades. The ledgers she'd left stacked were scattered like leaves. On the back of the front pew, someone had carved 3 words with impatient fury. "Walk away, Mara." She cleaned the mess with movements that kept her from shaking. Mateo found the crowbar where she didn't leave it. Luz found her drawing of the lantern creased under a boot print. Fear wanted space. She refused it. "Is this place worth the trouble?" Mateo asked at dawn, face pale with the kind of courage that doesn't want to be heroic. She looked at him and saw the city's worst habit reflected, the way it told people like them to be grateful for scraps. "If not us," she said, steady. "Who?" The words set her spine. When Rosa returned the next day, she brought a small brass token on a string, rubbed smooth by decades of palms. A lantern, cleanly punched through its face. "We wore them under our shirts," Rosa said, "so the right door opened when the wrong door closed." She pressed it into Mara's hand. "I kept this for funerals I refused to attend." The token fit the recess in the jamb like a word sliding into its sentence. Gears deep within the wall shivered, old iron remembering its purpose. The vault exhaled stale air scented with coal and wet limestone. The door moved, heavy on hidden tracks. An inch, then another, then stopped. A hiss seeped through the gap. the kind that means pressure arguing with stubbornness. Rosa stepped back, coughing. "Lantern Run floods," she said. "When the canal is high, the tunnels press back. We waited for the river to stop pressing before we dared press our luck." Maya slid her fingers into the gap until cold breathed on her knuckles. "Only at low tide," she said, the map whisper echoing. Lantern Run wasn't metaphor. It was a lung under their feet. By afternoon, a letter slid through the door slot upstairs. City letterhead. Notice of emergency hearing. Demolition petition cites public hazard. 72 hours. Utilities left voicemails about shutoffs. The school counselor left one about concerns for the children's safety. Pressure found new shapes. She stood in the nave between the past that fought back and a present trying to erase it again. Then she set the token back in the slot and laid her palm on the stuck edge. "We find proof," she said, to Rosa, to the ledgers, to her own reflection in the cracked glass. "We timed the river, and we opened what they tried to starve." The door didn't move, but the hum shifted, as if the culvert listened and waited for rain to quit pretending it owned the night. By dawn, the yellow notice on the door had multiplied. Bold stamps, red ink, language that felt like a fist. Unsafe, vacate, correct or face penalties. A pink envelope from utilities wedged beneath. Discontinuation pending. The school left another message about welfare checks. Pressure wasn't a storm anymore. It was paperwork with teeth. Maya laid the ledgers on a pew like a case file. Proof would have to outshout fear. She filmed with her phone, her voice steady. Lantern Run records, 1934 to 1972. Night class rosters, milk and clinic vouchers. The lens moved over columns and signatures. She flipped to a page where a midwife's initials matched a hospital intake. Cross-referenced, she said. Names erased here, but alive there. She held up a lesson schedule written in a looping hand. Monday, letters. Tuesday, numbers. Wednesday, citizenship. They taught the town to read under our feet. The Nav door creaked. A handful of neighbors hovered, drawn by rumor and the sight of the posted notices. She invited them in, palms open. "I can't ask you to stay," she said, "but I can ask you to look." A retired teacher in a green cardigan approached the pew. Her eyes snagged on a lesson plan dated 1958. She covered her mouth. "That's my hand," she whispered. "My first year out of normal school. We copied by lantern so the men outside couldn't see the light." The room changed shape, fear loosening its grip. People sat, bodies angled toward the proof instead of the warning. Mara read names aloud, a litany threaded with pauses. Rosa added, "That boy became a machinist who fixed 3 meals when no one else could. That girl nursed half this town through the flu." Quiet tears, not spectacle, release. A cough from the doorway cut the room's warmth. The city inspector stood there, hat in hand, mouth set. "I shouldn't be here," he said, but he stepped inside anyway. He walked the perimeter, eyes catching on water stains, noting joists, the slope of the floor. "I read your map," he said finally. "Your culvert vents through the west wall. When water's high, pressure pushes inward. A sealed chamber won't open under load." "So it isn't just rust," Mara said. "It isn't just rust." His tone softened. "My citations, some were boilerplate. I'll revise." He glanced at the crowd. "I can't bless occupancy, but I can tell you when water drops." The room exhaled. The lights flickered as if agreeing. Across town, Hale didn't wait. He filed for emergency demolition with photographs of cracked plaster, the inspector's initial notice clipped like a trophy. Hearing set in 72 hours. He sent a letter to the paper framing Mara as a squatter, endangering minors in a condemned site. The phone rang with reporters and strangers. Some offered help. Others offered doubt like a gift. That afternoon, an elderly mason shuffled down the aisle, cap twisting in his hands. His name was Enzo. He stared at the floor as if it might still speak to him. "I brick part of that vault," he said. "After the inspection with batons, the priest told me to leave a seam for air. We used a phrase so only the right mouths would open it." Rosa leaned in. "Say it." Only at low tide, he said, eyes wet. When Lantern Run breathes out, not in. Mara's pulse quickened. Then timing is our key. She checked the storm drain through the sacristy grill. Rain had slowed to a sullen drip. The culvert hiss softened to a whisper. The hum in the floor lost its edge. She gathered the small crowd at the sacristy. I need witnesses, she said, and hands if my courage falters. She slid the brass token into the slot. Metal responded, a deep, reluctant groan. Only at low tide, she spoke, voice low, sure. The door heaved another inch, then stalled, air thinning as if the tunnel held its breath. They waited. The inspector crouched by the vent, head tilted. Another few minutes, he murmured. Listen. They did. Water's song shifted key. Pressure eased. The hum dropped into a contented drone. Now, the inspector said. Mara put her shoulder to the steel. Rosa braced the jam. Mateo and Luz pressed their palms flat, as if lending the weight of their small certainty. Only at low tide, Mara repeated. A shudder rolled through the wall. Then the door slid, inch by inch, rails squealing like something relieved to move again. Cold air poured over them, smelling of coal, ink, and old thunder. Inside, the vault opened into a narrow aisle and a final barrier. A wooden archive chest banded in iron, the kind built to outlast fashions and wars. 3 neat slots cut into the latch plate, coins cousins, waited with patient hunger. The lantern symbol had been scratched in the lid's corner, quick and defiant. Mara knelt. Time felt layered. Rosa's breath behind her, Enzo's trembling hands, the inspector's quiet recalculations. She slid the token into one slot. It fit. Clicked. Withdrew reluctantly, as if tasting history. She tried the other 2. Empty. The lock didn't budge. A collective sigh rose, not despair, but the inhale before another try. 3 keys, Rosa said. 3 doors. We only had one for the nights when we couldn't risk voices upstairs. What do we do? Mateo asked. We hunt, Mara said. The map holds clues. The building talks if we listen. Upstairs, the light had shifted from pew quiet to resolve. She sketched the lock plate, the slots spacing, the faint engraving beside them. A music note, a fish, a lantern. Places, not just symbols. The choir loft, the confessional, the foundation stone. We've got 72 hours, she told them. Hale thinks urgency is his weapon. She closed the vault door enough to hide temptation, but not so far the mechanism would seize. He doesn't know we have our own clock. That night, utilities called again. She negotiated days, not months. The school left a final message. Home visit scheduled. She set a cot under the rose window and tucked the kids into blankets that smelled like cedar and dust. Then she sat in the aisle under the bruised will of glass and wrote names in a notebook of her own, hand cramped, heart steady, the hum beneath her chair now a purr. Proof in ink, pressure outside, and pushback turning into plan. Morning brought a thin sun and a thicker deadline. 3 slots, 1 token. 72 hours shrinking. Maya stood beneath the rose window with the sketched engravings, music note, fish, lantern, and mapped them to spaces the church had already taught her to respect. The choir loft for music, the confessional for the fish, the foundation stone for the lantern. The building wasn't hiding its secrets anymore. It was pointing. She started with the loft. The old organ's ribs gaped, pipes stacked like bones waiting for lungs. Dust sifted with every step. She ran her fingers beneath the rail where choir folders once hung. Nothing. She tapped the underside of the music stand, hollow. She pried gently. A shallow compartment released a curl of air and a small tin wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, a coin-sized disc of brass winked, engraved with the 16th note. She smiled, involuntary and quick. 1. A shout below. Mateo's voice, breathless. Mom, the confessional! He was half inside the booth when she reached him, flashlight beam carving gold through the gloom. He pointed to a panel where wood grain didn't match. It's like the attic. Mara eased a blade along the seam and lifted the sliver free. Behind it, a recess held a second token, oval, stamped with a fish's profile and a tiny cross hatching like scales. Mateo grinned. 2! He handed it over with a reverence that made the old wood feel younger. Luz tugged her sleeve gently, eyes intent. The lantern is in the floor. She led them toward the sanctuary steps, where the foundation stone sat a shade darker than the rest, its edges chamfered by a century of feet. Luz knelt, palm flat. Here, it tickles. Mara crouched and felt the faint buzz through stone, pressure breathing out. She traced the mortar seam. At one corner, a round plug no bigger than a walnut sat proud of the grout. She pressed. It sank with a soft click. A hairline gap opened along the stone's edge. She slid the crowbar in and lifted a fraction. Beneath, not a chamber, just a lip, enough to hide and protect. She reached in blind and her fingers touched cold metal. The third token came up slick with grit. Circle, lantern etched clean. Luz's smile widened, small and fierce. 3. The church answered with a ripple of sound, timbers settling, rainwater sighing through old veins, as though satisfied they were listening correctly. They didn't get to savor it. Hale's shadow arrived before his body did, lengthening down the nave like a storm front. He stepped in, flanked by 2 men in neon vests who smelled like diesel and impatience. You're accelerating a felony, he said calmly. Unpermitted excavation, children present. Cameras are very interested in this story. Good, Maya said. Let them watch. She raised her phone and hit go live. Comments began pooling like water in the lower left corner, names she didn't know arriving with little red hearts and cautious questions. The inspector appeared behind Hale, not quite endorsing, not willing to be absent. He tipped his chin toward the sacristy. Lantern runs dropping. Hale's smile turned wintry. Walk away, Miss Alvarez. I'll wire you enough to vanish. No one will blame a mother for choosing safety. The thing about temptation is how it dresses itself as care. Mara pictured Mateo's shoulders, Luz's careful hands, the names in the ledgers where someone had rubbed so hard the paper frayed. We're staying, she said. If you want to see what you're trying to bury, follow us. The vault room felt colder than before. Not hostile, focused. People had trickled in on the live feed's ping. Neighbors, the retired teacher, Enzo with his cap, Rosa already seated on a crate like a witness called to speak. Maya held up the 3 tokens so every lens could drink them in. Music, fish, lantern, she said. 3 doors, 1 promise. She slid the music token into the first slot. A hidden tumbler rolled with a sound like a throat clearing. The fish token seated with a click that traveled through the lid like a cord finding its third. She paused on the lantern. Luz squeezed her hand. Time, the inspector murmured, ear attuned to the culvert's new key. Maya inserted the lantern. A deeper catch engaged, mechanical and satisfied. The chest's bands loosened a hair, as if relaxing after years of clench. Hale stepped forward. Don't, he said, and the word carried more than threat, it carried panic. Only at low tide. Maya answered almost gently and lifted the lid. Air aged a century washed over them, ink, film, oiled wood, chalk. Inside lay reels of 16mm film in metal canisters labeled by hand, photographs in envelopes, rosters bound with twine, affidavits notarized in ink browned to tea. On top, a sealed envelope, clean, crisp despite the years. For the day they forget, it read. She broke the seal with her thumbnail. The crack was small thunder. Inside, a notarized addendum to the deed, dated in the year the church was deconsecrated, signed by trustees whose names matched the ledger's donors. The property, it stated, would be held in trust for the benefit of children's education and health. Failure to continue that purpose would revert ownership to the city for designation as a public learning site. A second page, typed, listed a directive, archive to be made public, Lantern Run to be documented for historical designation. Funds from guild trusts to be unfrozen upon proof of continuity. The room absorbed the words and changed shape again. Hale's face held, then cracked at the edges. He recovered into anger. Forgery, he said, too fast. Rosa tapped the signature line with her cane. That's my father's union mark, she said. I watched him sign a dozen papers slow because no one taught him to write fast. Enzo leaned in. That seal? I set the mortar the day they installed that ledger cabinet. I saw the stamp and the tears. Maya held the page up to the phone. For the day they forget, she read aloud, clear. We didn't. The inspector took the document delicately, not as a trophy, but as something hot. He checked the embossed seal with a fingertip. He nodded, slight. Enough. Pack it carefully, he said. Chain of custody. Then bring all of it to the hearing. Hale's voice dropped to a hiss only microphones make louder. You've made an enemy you can't afford. Mara met his eyes. You tried to make us forget. She gestured to the films, the rosters, the names. They didn't. Now everyone remembers. As they lifted the reels and photographs into clean boxes, Luz chalked a tiny lantern near the vault threshold. Mateo read names off a roster under his breath, a prayer that didn't need a god to hear it. Above them, the culvert hummed a steady approval, and the church held them the way a story holds its breath before the final sentence. The hearing room was so full the air felt shared. People stood along the walls, pressed into the doorway, craning to see. Hale sat with his attorney, lips a thin line. The city council shuffled papers with the care of someone handling live wire. Cameras blinked. Rosa squeezed Mara's hand once, a pulse of courage. Call the matter, the chair said, voice flat to hide its own nerves. Petition for emergency demolition, citing public hazard. Hale's attorney rose first. He leaned on phrases like imminent danger and non-compliance, laying photographs of cracked plaster and posted notices like stones. For the safety of minors, he said, tilting his head toward Mateo and Luz as if their existence were a prop. Maya stood when summoned, steady despite the thrum in her ribs. We brought documents, she said. The inspector carried the archive box to the front like a reliquary. Lantern Run records, affidavits, film, the deed addendum and trust directive. She passed the sealed pages up with clean hands. This property's purpose was never profit. It was children. Counsel read in silence that stretched. The room held its breath. When she looked up, something in her posture had changed. Less defense, more recognition. We'll need verification, she said carefully, but the signatures and seals appeared genuine. Rosa rose unasked. I gave my winters to that tunnel, she said. My father gave his wages. The city took our names and put them in someone else's mouth. We kept teaching when the lights were cut. If you pull this building down, you tear a promise you didn't make but you inherited. Enzo stepped beside her. I mortared that vault so kids had a door when men came with nightsticks, he said. We left a seam so breath could pass. You leave one now. The inspector cleared his throat. Regarding citations, he said, some were misapplied in haste. I reviewed structural elements this morning. With targeted stabilization, the nave is not an imminent collapse risk. My office rescinds the emergency unsafe posting pending a plan. Hale spoke without standing. This is sentiment dressed as law, he muttered, but the cameras caught it, and the room didn't like the fit. Maya placed the roster on the table, names facing the board. These are the children who learn to read under your streets. Many are your parents, your grandparents. If continuity triggers funds, we can restore safely. If designation is granted, demolition is stayed automatically. A historian from the State Archive raised a hand from the back, voice carrying like a bell. We've previewed the films, she said. They show classes by lantern. They show food distribution during strikes. There are notarized statements matching hospital records. This is a historic site. I recommend expedited designation. Silence cracked into murmurs. The chair tapped a pen. Motion to table demolition pending verification of the trust and historic review. Heads nodded. Motion carries. She looked at Mara. Miss Alvarez, submit a stabilization plan with community partners. Emergency grants may be available under heritage preservation. The room shifted from waiting to exhale. People began to clap, not a roar, but a tide. Hale gathered his papers like a man sweeping up broken glass. He paused at Mara's shoulder. "You won a day," he said softly. She met his gaze. We made history breathe again. Lights returned to the nave before the weather did. Volunteers showed up with ladders, tarps, and the kind of competence that doesn't post selfies. The inspector walked the aisles with a grease pencil, marking beam ties and sistering points, teaching as he went. Grants moved faster than anyone believed they could. The historian arrived with acid-free boxes and reverence. The films were digitized by a university lab. The first reel projected on a sheet stretched between columns. The room went still at the flicker of children raising chalk to brick, mouths forming letters you could almost hear. They lit lanterns in the nave, not candles that would fight the inspector's nerves, but battery lamps with warm filaments. Rows of them along the aisle, small suns pooling light on scarred wood. The chalkboard salvaged from the basement stood upright again, lesson plan copied in a careful hand. Monday, letters. Tuesday, numbers. Wednesday, citizenship. Rosa took the chalk like a violin bow and wrote the date. Her hand shook, then steadied. "Repeat after me," she said, and voices, young, old, tired, eager, repeated together. A small clinic corner took shape near the side chapel. 2 screens, a donated exam table, a per diem nurse who smiled like a lighthouse. The culvert door wore a fresh gasket and a painted symbol, and every child who passed it pressed a palm to the lantern and left a smudge of dust like a blessing. Mateo and Luz organized the reading circle under the rose window where afternoon light turned faces into stained glass. "Your turn," Mateo said, passing a book to a boy who had never read aloud in public. Luz leaned near, whispering the hard words when he needed them, then letting go. When the historian pinned photographs along a clothesline between columns, workers with ink-stained fingers, women ladling soup, children in hand-me-down coats, people found their own. "That's my mother," someone whispered. "That's my uncle who made the switch gears." Tears fell, shoulders touched. The nave filled with the murmur of recognition, the opposite of erasure. On the first night class, the bell in the weeds wasn't lifted yet, but they rang it anyway. A rubber mallet tapped its cracked mouth, and the sound that rose was modest and clear, a note that knew it was enough. The building seemed to inhale. You could feel it, how wood, stone, and name stitched themselves into a whole again. After closing, Maya locked the archive chest and slid the 3 tokens into new hiding places the church had suggested. Music, confession, foundation. Rain-threaded lantern run, steady and content. She stood in the sacristy's quiet and pressed her palms to the chalk dust until the lantern's outline glowed on her skin. "Let the little ones find light," she whispered, and the nave answered with a soft, living hush. If this story resonated, tell us about a forgotten place in your town that deserves another chance. Share your hidden history in the comments. Subscribe for more stories of resilience and discovery, and watch next, The Old Railway Station That Became a Sanctuary.